Hello and welcome to Niaga Spotlight with me, Tamina Kausji. Niaga Spotlight takes us through the week in economic analysis and future affairs. Now today on Analysis, our spotlight is on, of course, the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, or IDEVAW 2025, looking in particular at marriage migration and economic impacts. Now, as we mark IDEVAW 2025, we widen the lens. Gender-based violence is not only what happens in homes and on screens. It also lives in the rules that decide who can work, who must depend, and who is kept invisible in the economy. That is economic violence, the kind built quietly into systems, and marriage migration is one of Malaysia's clearest examples. We have an estimated 200,000 binational families in the country, yet the policies which govern their lives still rely on archaic assumptions about dependency as well as controlled. Highly qualified foreign spouses, many with degrees and years of professional experience, are kept out of the workforce because of restrictive employment pass conditions or employer confusion about their right to work. New research by Family Frontiers Malaysia shows that only a small fraction manage to secure formal employment even after years in Malaysia. The economic cost is real. World Bank modelling estimates between 10 to 15 billion ringgit in potential GDP is lost every year due to underemployment and administrative barriers faced by skilled residents, including such non-citizen spouses. When these women cannot work, the entire household absorbs the strain. When families leave for countries with clearer pathways, Malaysia loses existing and future talent too. And this is where IDEVAW matters. When a woman's right to safety is tied to her right to work, to live independently, and to plan her future without fear of visa lapses or sponsorship withdrawal, then the issue is no longer about immigration rules. It becomes an issue of dignity, resilience, and the kind of economy Malaysia wants to build. So, if Malaysia has the talent, the families, and the evidence, what is stopping us from designing a system that reflects our ambitions? Welcoming to the studios for this very timely discussion, Patricia Lau, Research and Policy Coordinator with Family Frontiers, economist Dr. Melati Nungsari, together with Dr. Nadine Rupert, wildlife conservation biologist and a non-citizen mother of Malaysian children. A very good morning to you all. So getting the discussion started straight off. Patricia, perhaps let's frame this a little before we launch into talking hard facts. What was the parameters of Family Frontiers' new research report? Tell us more.
Thank you, Tamina. So this research was done in the last quarter of 2024, and it used mixed methods, but bearing more towards the qualitative method, where we looked at non-citizen wives of Malaysians residing in the country, in Malaysia. And the objective of the research was to map migration pathways, the legal landscapes, and the key challenges that they face while living here in Malaysia.
Right, exactly. So now this is research that has also come out of the breadth and the depth of the work that Family Frontiers is very deeply involved in. Now let's look at what are some of the financial risks, perhaps the top two, which are binational families that have been studied actually repeatedly report and inform you about.
Okay, I think it's important to first set the scene.
Yes, please.
For people to understand that securing permanent residence is very challenging and it's often a very prolonged process.
Arduous process, yes.
And so while waiting to be eligible for PR or for a decision to be made on their PR, they will need to hold what we call a long-term social visit pass, an LTSVP, with validity that ranges from 1 to 3 years, 6 months in some cases. And LTSVP holders face incredible barriers to employment. First is that the LTSVP has a statement of prohibition printed on the sticker or the piece of paper,
right,
which says any form of employment is strictly prohibited. Now, non-citizen spouses can apply for an endorsement with immigration, and then that statement will be struck out. However, it's a bit of a catch-22 because to apply for the work endorsement, you will need to have an offer letter, a job offer from a prospective employer. However, many employers, upon seeing this statement of prohibition, they are very reluctant. Many do not understand the processes, or
wouldn't want to commit to a complicated process.
Yes, exactly. And so, as a result, many non-citizen spouses they struggle to find work, and many are forced to take up jobs that do not match their skills or their professional training. I think For women, in our research, just over half of them who were surveyed are not employed. A lot of them are carrying out unpaid care work in the home, whether by choice or otherwise. Some have indicated that they have withdrawn from seeking work, I think faced with a lot of discouragement as policies continually shut the doors in their face.
Exactly. So perhaps briefly then, what specific policy instrument might Family Frontiers recommend to mitigate these risks that have been long existing and that I think in 2025 we can no longer take for granted due to the economic exclusion?
I think the simplest and the very first thing is the removal of the statement of prohibition to enable equal access to employment for non-citizen spouses with the LTSVP. I think it's very important to reform the PR process. So we have received news that there have been changes implemented by the immigration in terms of PR processing requirements and the processing times. And we welcome every improvement, every effort taken to improve the lives of non-citizen spouses. But I think we have to be clear that the policies for PR have to be clear and transparent, fair and equal to both men and women, not different requirements for different genders, reasonable processing time, reasons given for rejections, and I think this is very important. We want to, I think the rest will also maybe expand on this, to extend the PR categories for abused wives, divorcees, and widows.
That's right.
And in the interim, while they wait for PR processing, for example, to provide immigration passes to them that are longer term and give them the right to work. So currently the visa, special category visas for neglected, abused, divorcees and widows, they do not give them the right to work. And the validity of the passes are really, really short.
Well noted. Thanks so much for, placing us very clearly around where we're anchoring this discussion. And of course, now I move to asking Dr. Melati. Now, of course, I hope that you'll be able to situate us from an economic modeling perspective, but also feel free to please tell us a little bit more about how this issue also has really deep roots and far-widening branches. It also affects you personally, in a sense.
Thank you, Tamina. So, as the economist, I sort of feel compelled to show a couple of numbers. So I'm just going to walk through how I kind of estimated a little bit of the productivity, or basically the economic growth lost. So just to summarize from the report from Family Frontier, so as of 2023, there were about 130,000 non-citizen wives of Malaysians holding active passes. Out of that number, we have that they're overwhelmingly prime age. So basically ages 65% are between 44 years old and very highly educated. So about half have bachelor's degrees and a quarter have master's or PhD degrees. Yet we know that from 2020 to 2024, only about 11.4% of this group were legally employed. And in fact, to add to what Pat said, 99% of respondents said that their legal status depended on their Malaysian spouse's sponsorship or presence at renewal, which very discourages kind of independent female participation in the labor force, which is, and I was telling Nadine earlier, a very standard textbook definition of brain waste, meaning that there's a lot of very skilled labor that is not being utilized very much. So if we look at basically just putting the numbers that I told you into actual, GDP numbers, so we know that the Malaysian GDP per worker currently is about 120,000 ringgit per year. And if we multiply that with assuming 60% of the people, women here on active passes eligible to work, let's say 60% is kind of the number we want to go for the female participation for this group, we see that if we multiply these two numbers, we get around 7 to 8 billion per year productivity loss, basically, from taking 11% to 60% of employment in this group. And this is about 0.5% of Malaysia's annual GDP. So, when you put it percentage, it doesn't seem very much. But to me, when we're talking billions and
we're talking individual families as well, from which those numbers are potentially drawn
Exactly.
from.
And this estimate is actually quite conservative, right? Because we know that when women work, they enrich the family more. We know that there's a lot of innovation gains, technological transfers between very skilled women and the local labor force. So I would say conservatively 7 to 8 billion. So that is a huge amount. And the roots are, varied. So we talk about, for example, labor market access is limited. So Pat spoke about the LTSVP prohibition to work.
Yes.
This, if changed, can bring potentially very high and fast returns. So, for example, one thing that would be nice is for employment to basically be open up to all sectors, and for the requirement for spousal consent to work be removed as well.
Correct.
So currently Malaysian spouses basically have power over their wife's livelihood.
To restrict it or
Correct.
to allow for it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so you can imagine if the marriage is tenuous in any way, then this really restricts access for the women. And we also have another lever, which is something that is longer term, very large, but takes a while. So for example, having predictable PR timelines, we spoke about, processing times and stuff like that. And also the last thing I want to talk about is independent status once there are Malaysian children involved, or if they're X years of residence in the country. And I think Nadine will probably speak a little bit about that, which will both safeguard the child, but also safeguard, the family harmony, right? Because it shouldn't be that your labor market access is dependent on whether your marriage is successful. It should be more of a concrete relationship to the state.
Absolutely, and that is one that many of these non-citizen spouses quite often have due to the fact that they are already mothers to Malaysian children.
Yep.
But even if you are not a mother,
Yep.
it remains that you do have the human right and also the labor market participation right
Yep.
to be gainfully employed. Thank you very much, Dr. Melati. Dr. Nadine, at this juncture, moving into asking you, of course, about the relationship between life planning under the sort of perpetual contingency. But first, could you help situate us based on your lived experience within the system when it comes to all of these issues, in particular in relation to employment and residency?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Tamina. My background is that I have been living in Malaysia continuously for 16 years. However, I've been married longer. I've married my husband, my Malaysian husband, in Germany. So we came back with our child, and I got offered a PhD position in Malaysia and continued successfully at a public university after my PhD as a lecturer for 11 years working here. My contract ended about 2 months ago. And during the time I was married, because currently I'm separated from my husband, we many times asked for the application forms to apply for permanent residency in my case. And many things happened. It's nothing I can go in detail, but I was never basically allowed to apply for PR. Now, fast forward, since I'm separated and divorced soon, maybe, there's no pathway also for me to get a PR, a permanent residency. Now, coming back to the continuous situation of not being sure how the family planning, how the next months will be developing is very, in my situation, very interesting, because my university that I worked for many, many years could only give me short-term contracts because I did not have a permanent residency. So
which also then naturally affects your career progression with regards to potential tenureship, etc.
So it's what Pat says, there's a catch-21 as well, because I could not obtain PR. My university could not grant me a permanent position as a lecturer. And of course, this is continuous after 1-year contracts, and maybe the longest I got was a 2 years contract. Life planning is revolving around this question: will I have an employment next year? Will I be able to contribute to the family? Especially in my situation, my husband was financially not able to contribute much, so most of the income was depending on me, and we have 3 children. So it is very stressful to live from contract to contract and not be able to do long-term planning. Can we afford buying a car? Can we afford to buy property? I could buy a car, take a loan in my name in the bank, which was good. However, I got very high interest rate, a very short period of paying off that loan because I'm a foreigner. Even though my husband was my grantor, I had to pay off my car in 5 years, which was a new car. You can calculate how much that was. So it is very challenging. And in the end of the day, after 10 years of employment with a public university, there was another challenge, because now after 10 years of service, the Ministry of Home Affairs needs to give special approval to extend my contract / extend my visa or work endorsement. In the beginning, I got a work endorsement on my long-term social visit pass, depending on my husband. However, after we got separated, he couldn't endorse my my visa, he couldn't come to extend my visa, and he couldn't give me work endorsement. So the immigration asked me to change that to a work pass or like an employment pass, which has implications as well, because once you change a visa type from a social visa to an expat visa, you have to leave the country. You have to be outside to wait. And that was in the midst of an employment, of taking care of 3 Malaysian children who go to school. I was asked to leave the country. So there are many challenges, and I think many individual families face very similar or very different challenges, but all in the context of insecurity, economically, but also just what is going to happen next if my visa is not going to be extended, what's going to happen to my children if I'm separated, if I have to leave the country. And in that sense, there is, it's very stressful, to be honest. And every family has their own experiences, and that's my experience that I had.
And it's definitely a fair statement to say that it is unnaturally difficult. And with a 7 to 8 billion projected GDP annual losses, no small amount either to snigger at. Which brings me back to Patricia. Patricia, let's talk deeper about some of the structural vulnerabilities. Nadine had, of course, started off the entire discussion, but your research is also reporting that close to 15% of surveyed non-citizens' mothers have also faced separation from their Malaysian children. A little bit more about this of course, there's the human impacts, but it's tied in with the economic structures that anchor the vulnerability, right?
Yes. So because of how the immigration passes are tied to dependency to the spouse, if the marriage breaks down, etc., the risk of family separation is great. Many spouses have been forced to leave the country because they have no viable passes to remain in Malaysia.
No legal means
to remain
resident.
No pathways given to them. And so that leads to the risk of family separation. And so I think in light of this, immigration policies really need to be viewed from a gender and family lens, that it has to be gender responsive, it has to be family centered. It must place the interests of the child as well, and the spouse. And in our research, not just in Malaysia, but in the context of marriage migration in the region, around the world, is highly gender specific. So women make up most of marriage migrants in the world.
That's correct, globally, not just in Malaysia.
Yeah, not just in Malaysia. And so the impacts are gendered, and women are disproportionately affected. And so policies must take that into account when we think about how do we provide, provisions and pathways for non-citizen spouses to be with their family in this country.
Exactly. Now, you had also, of course, spoken a little earlier about redesigning the spouse visa regime to actually decouple legal status from, of course, the spousal sponsorship, as particularly in cases where there might be abuse or perhaps even separation and divorce involved. But this would also require a monitoring mechanism. What are some thoughts around what can be put in as a framework, just to put it out there so that those listening, especially the policymakers, are able to grasp what it would take on a practical, operational level?
I think data collection is very important. You cannot make policies based on hearsay or what you think or what you assume. It has to be backed and based on evidence, on hard facts, right? So data collection is very important, even for us in Family Frontiers. Access to data, to official data, to us it's not easy. It's not easy. The doors are often very close, are close to us. And I think not just data collection, but it has to be disaggregated by gender and made accessible to the public. And so through data collection, we can determine the changes and movements in, say, transitions in passes. And if the PR processes are improved, we should see an uptake or an increase in number of permanent residence applications. And also the data on domestic violence experienced by non-citizen wives. And I think also maybe the other monitoring mechanism I can suggest is to have confidential channels for providing feedback and complaints. I think that's how, whether it is working for the people that it's intended for.
Exactly. What I can also think of is the further dimension, which could be another hidden vulnerability, whereby you actually have gender-based discrimination related to status dependence, being that many non-citizen spouses then do not even report cases of abuse, and they silently endure it due to all the structural vulnerabilities associated with it. Thank you. Thank you for that, Patricia. Melati, moving back into looking at bureaucratic friction and informality when it comes to labor, situate us within the framework of marriage migration and how this is actually something which is almost an expected impact due to the way we are set up.
So I think the kind of like pulling back a little bit from the specifics of the Malaysian context,
Sure.
I think generally we all know that even without legal or visa constraints, women are going to have a much harder time being and returning to the workforce. We know that fertility rates are dropping, and I think that's not surprising given how difficult life is for all women involved. But also we know that women typically will be the ones doing primary childcare, doing all of the care work for the family, for the spouse, and the spouse's family as well, right? So if that is already kind of the default that we're working with, adding in any type of economic barrier to participating will make it significantly worse. And I typically don't like to, I feel like I always need to highlight the care aspect because to me, I mean, people may not be formally working, but they're working.
Yes,
they're working very hard.
Work.
It's just we don't count them in the formal numbers, which is very bad for us. But the point is that any sort of restriction will, in fact, kind of depress labor interaction at all. So informality is something that we know is difficult for a variety of different reasons, and primarily here for the gender aspect, it opens up women to exploitation on a variety of different aspects, right? Your employer doesn't have to, your informal employer doesn't have to pay you, you don't have any protection in terms of, if anything happens to you at work, your children basically suffer if you are sick or ill and stuff like that. So I think that is something that ideally, we would like to see not happen anymore in this context. But I also wanted to kind of mention, for Malaysia specifically, I think one thing that really struck me reading Pat's report was how non-transparent the entire process is.
Right.
So Family Frontiers, I think, in the report was urging for, PR access, and Nadine spoke a bit about this, to be given within 5 years of, settling in the country. I believe that was one of the recommendations, something like that. And so echoing the data part, DOSM has done a fantastic job in recent years making a lot of private data more transparent. I think the chief statistician is excellent and knows basically what to do with the public data. Why not do,
harness that data?
Yeah, and we can do it because we've seen DOSM do it before. So, let people know, for example, where you are in the process of applying. Do you have 2 more years to get to where you need to be? Do you have 1 more year? We cannot have blanket rejections for specific things that we don't even know why the visa got rejected. Like, why is one person 6 months? Why is one person's 5 years? So a bit more transparency will allow, I think, will not alleviate the problem, but in the short term could make, families a bit more secure in terms of how to plan forward. Because we know that people who feel more secure are more likely to contribute to the economy, more likely to raise happy, healthy children, which is a very important part that's forgotten here. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That brings me to it made me think of 2 things. For example, on one hand, you've got qualified non-citizen spouses. There needs to be actually sectoral data around which specific streams of employment or professional recognition that they could fall under. But also, if you are not qualified in a formalized level, then talking about upskilling programs, etc., because there are dozens of industries which require that skilled labor in Malaysia currently. And I'm sure there's plenty of stories when it comes to what the non-citizen spouses have actually shared for Malaysia. But Melati, perhaps before we finish over here, now, what kind of, let's say, indicators should Malaysian policymakers be interested in to actually look at this issue, but with a lens towards actionable solutions?
So I think one thing that is not typically collected in the Malaysian context is actually connecting the visa issues that the families are facing to outcomes of the child. So it was actually monitoring with Ministry of Education, because kids have to go to school, with the welfare department to understand basically like dropout rates. Are kids with one foreign parent suddenly not being able to come to school? Are there issues at school with health and with performance and stuff like that? And that should be fed back into tied basically directly to immigration issues that the family faces. And so that is something that I don't really think we are doing so much because it's disruptive. Like I think Nadine talked about, it's disruptive to the family, it's understandable, and monitoring that I think will give a bit more context. And the second thing is I would really urge whoever's watching this to read the Family Frontiers report, but I feel like this cannot be a one-time thing. It has to be something that is repeated over time to see whether things have improved, right? Because if Pat does this 5 years from now and it gets worse, not so good, but maybe we did something good and then we made it easier for families to live here, a peaceful, productive life. In that case, that's good. So I like to kind of see more repeated studies that give policymakers a bit more data on what's actually happening on the ground.
Thank you. Thanks so much for highlighting that, because the dimension of impacts on the children from such marriages as well is something that is completely invisibilized. But then again, those children, especially if, of course, they've been born in Malaysia, they are citizens, right? Could there be perhaps an institutional change, even if it was one singular thing, which might be able to yield an improvement, say, within the next calendar year?
Ooh, that's a difficult one. Next calendar year. I think, just going off of what Nadine was saying before, I think the thing that shouldn't be too difficult is the removal of the condition on the long-term social visit pass. That is something that I feel like is pretty easy to execute. And the next thing I think is to create, or at least have steps in the next calendar year, to make it sure that women who are typically primary careholders of the children, caregivers of the children, do not have to leave the country due to a collapse in the marriage or to abuse cases or to any sort of tension within the family, because that is deprioritizing the child, not only the woman, but the child. And so to me, I think because Malaysia is quite progressive in a lot of our child reform areas, that is something that I feel like we can push for, which is currently not in place.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, hopefully that is something which we can move towards. Dr. Nadine, to look and dig even deeper into public narratives around marriage migration. Now, what is often invisibilized, of course, is the direct impacts and how all of these legal, immigration-related and work-related restrictions and difficulties then shape power structures within the home. Tell us a little more, especially from your lived experience too, and also working within the system.
Yeah, thank you. Before I do that, I just want to add something before we lose that point. What Melati and Pat has said is very true. So the removal of the statement in the long-term social visit pass is important. However, I think just to give a little bit background as well, and that is my experience that I want to touch on, and then I will answer your question, is that currently, since I am not employed anymore with a Malaysian institution or employer, I cannot hold the employment pass anymore. So I am the single mother and caretaker of 3 Malaysian children. I have full custody, legal custody of the children. However, there is no pathway to apply for permanent residency, because for permanent residency, you either have to be married to a Malaysian spouse, you have to be the child of a Malaysian parent, or you have to be a highly professional, trained, skilled worker. And even with a PhD, I'm not falling under that category because it's a point system and you have to collect a certain amount of points. There is no pathway to PR currently for a single parent, not just a mother, a single parent to Malaysian children who holds full custody, legal custody. And I think this is something that needs to change.
Grievous oversight, certainly, since the children are directly dependent on you.
Yes.
Let's also talk about the next stage, which is when those children reach age of majority.
Exactly.
Please.
So once, and if there's no permanent residency given, so currently I can apply for a 5 years residence pass. This is an offer that I will take because I'm still in the situation of changing my employment pass to another visa. With a residence pass, that is a 5-year valid pass, I'm allowed to work. However, a residence pass cannot give me a pathway to PR, to permanent residency either. So a residence pass can be extended. There might be barriers to extension once the children are above 18. I don't know, my youngest son is 12, so I don't know what's going to happen in the next 6
So the
years.
framework really marginalizes both when the children are below legal age and above legal age. Dr. Nadine, Dr. Melati and Patricia, thank you so much for the enlightening conversation and your insights. Well, what we've heard is clear. When immigration rules block legally resident spouses from working or securing stable residency, the cost is carried by families and also by the Malaysian economy. The data points to 7 to 8 billion in average in lost productivity, rising vulnerability, and talent also then quietly leaving our shores. As IDEVAW 2025 reminds us, economic violence is not abstract. It is actually built into our systems, and systems can be changed. The question now is whether Malaysia is ready to align its policies with the human capital and family stabilities we say we value. That's all we have time for today. I'm Tamina Kausji, signing off for now.